Hi there and welcome to Magnus and the Arts, and this is my 13th interview. This time it's Swedish illustrator and writer Johan Egerkrans, and he's behind this awesome book, Väsen. It's awesome. It's about, creatures from myth and mythology, and we have the Norse gods. Super awesome too, and the undead. Some beautiful books, and this one, Drakar or Dragons in English, this actually comes out in English today on April 8th, so go get one. I will supply the links below, so shop away. Anyway, this is my long talk with Johan Egerkrans. I hope you enjoy.
Hi, I'm Johan Egerkrans, or I always say Johan Egerkrans in English, but it sounds weird. But Johan Egerkrans is my name. I'm a Swedish illustrator and writer, and the last 10 years, I've been mainly focusing on children's books, or sort of children's books at least, sort of all-around books. They work for children, but they work for adults as well. About myth and folklore from all over the world, but I started here in Scandinavia and sort of moved exponentially outwards, so to speak. So next book is going to be about space. No, it's not, but I've sort of expanded my view. So that's it. Yeah, I've been working professionally as an illustrator since I was 16, I think. I grew up in Lidingö, which is a sort of a posh island outside of Stockholm, and have always been fascinated about myth and folklore and dinosaurs and science and myth. That is sort of the main passions in my life, and at a very early age, I almost came out with a pencil in hand, so to speak, from the womb. So I think I started drawing when I was 2 or something like that, and I've been doing that ever since. And so I always been drawing and painting and sculpting, stuff like that, and I started reading at a pretty early age as well. So when I went through the sort of the book devourer age at 10, I read everything I could get my hands on. And one of those things were myths. I became obsessed with, or not obsessed, but I was really fascinated by especially the old Norse myths and the Greek mythology. So I read a lot about that. And then at the age of 10, 11 or something like that, a friend introduced me to role-playing games. And that also was one of those sort of pivotal, formative moments when a completely new world sort of opened up, and new vistas opened up. So I became, the way role-playing games presented a world that you could sort of take part in became sort of integral to the way I think about fiction, and the way I think about illustration as well. Because many of the books I do now could basically be like monster manuals for a role-playing game. Many of my books are very based on the same format, that you have a nice illustration of a thing, a creature, and then you have some evocative text about that creature, and then next page you got another creature, and so on and so forth. I just love that setup, the way of how the role-playing game products sort of present a world that sets your imagination on fire. So anyway, that was really formative. So I started when I met role-playing games. When I started playing them, I got I was really into it, and started drawing my own characters, and we made new adventures, and we draw maps, and all that stuff. And then when I was 16, I got approached by a local newspaper. So I started doing a comic for them, like a comic strip. So that was I think that was my first paid gig. So I became a professional illustrator of sorts when I was 16. And a few years later, when I had finished, what's the equivalent? High school? Yeah. Or not? Yeah, high school. And was on my way to the university. It just so happened I met a friend called Johan Egerkrans who studied in my school. He was a few years older, but I knew him. And it turned out he worked with role-playing games. And I had no idea, because for me he was more a rock musician. He had a rock band and a punk band, and he was a teacher, part-time teacher as well. But it turned out he worked with role-playing games, and he and a friend were working on a new role-playing game, and they had started up a company of their own called Cell. So as it happened, I got to illustrate their first role-playing game called Gemini, which came out in 1998, I think. So I was 20. And I started working with Johan and Stefan, who was the other guy, Johan Sjöberg and Stefan Ljungqvist. And I went to Lund, which is a university town in the south of Sweden, and studied business of all things. I never worked with that, but I had a fun time studying. So I went to the university, but at the same time I started working as a concept artist for them, and they had sort of parallel to the games company. They started up a computer games company, so they did both role-playing games and tabletop games and computer games. So I mainly worked with the computer games as a concept artist, so sort of drawing all the monsters and weapons and levels and whatever. I was the concept artist. So I did everything, and that was my school basically, working with Johan and Stefan, because I got to do everything you could imagine. I did the covers for the games. I did comic book spin-offs. I did level design. I did concept of just sort of classic concept art. I did textures for the games themselves. I did everything you could imagine, and in various different styles. So I got to sort of flex my versatility muscles, so to speak. So I did that for a few years, and then they went belly up, as some computer games companies have a tendency to do. And I started working with some other guys who also came from the old, because a lot of people in Sweden in the computer game world come from the old role-playing game companies. So they were also from Target Games, which is the biggest, was the biggest role-playing game company in Sweden. So I worked with them for a few years, but at that time I started freelancing as well as an illustrator. And me and my old boss, Stefan, did a children's book called Taggtråds-Tim, so Barbed Wire Tim. Nothing to do with barbed wire with Pamela Anderson. It's not. But it was a very sad, poetic book about a guy at a boy at an orphanage who were bullied by his friends, or not friends, but bullied by the other kids. And I think that one came out so I illustrated that. It came out in 2005, I think. And it got a bit of recognition at least within the industry. So that opened up a lot of doors for in publishing. So I started working more and more with children's books in Sweden and Norway and Denmark. It started more and more I started sort of sauntering vaguely into that direction instead of doing concept art. My editor Maya started pushing me to do something on my own, to write as well as illustrate. And I had no idea what to do, because what was sort of in vogue at the time was doing some sort of Harry Potter knockoff. Everybody did Harry Potter knockoffs. It was at the dawn of the young adult boom. And I sort of realized I didn't want to do that. I wasn't interested in creating my own story based on sort of the classic tropey, what's it called? Joseph Campbell, sort of hero's journey type thing with a chosen main character without parents who sort of realized his magic or she's magic or whatever. But I didn't want to do that sort of well-trodden story, and I didn't have enough ideas to write a storybook in that way. So I pondered it for a bit. But what should I do? What sort of suits me if I'm gonna write something? And then I sort of fell upon it. Came to me that but Monster Manual, something like that. And I had since I was rather young, I had always been fascinated with a book called Fairies by Brian Froud and Ala Lee that came out in the late 70s, which is a book about gorgeous illustrated book about British folklore, fairies and otherworldly creatures from British folklore, British, Irish, and Scottish folklore, and Welsh. But from the British Isles. Sorry. So I thought, well, maybe if I could do something like that, but within a Scandinavian context. And that became my book, Väsen. So that came out in 10 years ago, almost, in 2013. And I think I started work on it 2011, something like that. So that came out, and people liked it. So I got to do more books. So then I did Norse Gods, about the Norse gods. It's sort of self-explanatory. My titles are generally pretty self-explanatory. And then I needed a break from all the mythical stuff, so I did a couple of books about my other passion that I mentioned earlier, which are dinosaurs and paleontology. So I did two books about one book about dinosaurs and one about like the other guys who are sort of with the band, but they're not dinosaurs. So I did one book about dinosaurs and one book about pterosaurs and sea monsters, so plesiosaurs and mosasaurs and all those marine reptiles that shared the Mesozoic world with the dinosaurs. And then I did I started doing lots of books, and what's common, the sort of common what's it called, the common thread among them is that they're always sort of pop science books in a way. I present facts. When it's dinosaurs, it's facts. When it's myths, it's more like, I present the myths in a rather, how would you say, a sort of matter of fact way, I'd say. So they have the same style, and I think some reviewers said that I make myths concrete and science seem like myth. So, but I think I'm very passionate about both those subjects, and that sort of shines through. So yeah, that's the story basically. That's what I'm doing, and that's what I think I'll keep on doing. Yeah, like I said before, the first book I did was myself, was väsen, Nordiska väsen in Swedish. And that's, I took inspiration from Brian Froud and Alan Lee's Fairies. So it's a book about the creatures from Swedish and Scandinavian folklore, mainly Swedish. I'm working on rectifying that, but that's a different thing. And I wanted the book to feel timeless. So I drew a lot of inspiration from the painters of the Golden Age painters, like the Jugend painters from basically 100 years ago, like John Bauer, of course, who's the famous Swedish troll painter. Arthur Rackham, who's sort of the British equivalent, Edmond Dulac, who's a French illustrator but mostly worked in Britain as well. And the Dane Kai Nielsen, and there's a lot of those. And then the guy who took over from John Bauer is called Gustav Tenggren, and he also worked for Disney. So, but there's a whole the whole Jugend movement that started in the early 1900s, the early 20th century. I always get that confused. So I wanted that sort of classic storybook feel to the book, to make it feel. It should be. I think we sort of formulated it like that it should be a book that could be read 100 years ago, and will be able to be read from 100 years in the future. That it's sort of really lend it a timeless feel, and that's sort of integral to how it's designed, how the texture and feel of the book, that it's got a cloth cover. We wanted to emulate the look of old books without being like a pastiche. It's still a modern book, but we really wanted to evoke that feeling. And that sort of goes for the text as well, the way I wrote it. I wanted a timeless feel to the text, with a sort of sprinkled with a dry wit, but it's pretty to the point. Guess that's a Swedish thing, perhaps. And the illustrations invoked this sort of Jugend feel as well. So I looked a lot, and like most Swedish artists grew up on John Bauer. We always have that sort of relationship to John Bauer and the way he paints woods, the way he draws his trolls, these moss-covered stones and all that. So I that's one of the cornerstones of the look of Väsen. And then I sort of injected it with my own other influences, which are the role-playing games illustrators I grew up with, comic books I read when I was in that age, that sort of formative age. So my house gods, you got John Bauer, but I also got Mike Mignola, who did Hellboy, Simon Bisley, who painted Slain and Lobo and Judge Dredd, stuff like that. So it's sort of mixed up with a bit more the sort of edgy 90s, sort of the painted comic books of the 90s. That's one of my huge inspirations as well. So I sort of mixed those two styles, and that became something quite, strangely effective. And I sort of continued to tinker with that style. but yeah, Wesen came out and was really popular, so I got the opportunity to do more books. And one of the first things we sort of talked about, me and my editor, when I started doing Wesen, was the Norse gods. But I didn't want to take on that subject as my first book, because it felt a bit daunting, because it's been done by so many talented people, everyone from Snorri Sturlason himself to Neil Gaiman to Kirby, like the Marvel Thor, and it's been done a number of times by extremely talented people. So I wanted to do something else first, to sort of see if I actually could do a book like that. And with Wesen, that sort of proved to myself and to others that I could do that. So then I did Norse Gods, and it's probably the hardest book I've ever done, because I had put an enormous amount of pressure on myself I really wanted to get it right. So it's probably the book I'm the proudest of, because it was quite a journey to do that book. And like Wesen, I based a lot on those old illustrators from the Golden Age, but perhaps leaned more towards Aleksi Gallen-Kallela, a Finnish painter who did a lot of motifs from Kalevala, like the Finnish national epic, and Kai Nielsen is a Danish illustrator who was a bit more stylized than the other guys. So I took a lot. That's sort of what I based that. They were the sort of house gods for Norse gods. And then when I went over and sort of, okay, now I've done 2 huge, big projects, 2 big mythology books, I wanted to do something else. So then I took on dinosaurs, and I chose to do that in a completely different style. So it's much done in a more very stylized, cartoony style, or almost like concept art for a Disney movie or something like that. But it's sort of it worked quite well as well, because when you do something stylized, when you do, like, the illustrators of Lion King really needs to know how the animators for Lion King really needs to know how a lion works, to be able to simplify them into that sort of stylized basic shape. So I did sort of try to do the same thing with the dinosaurs, to sort of simplify them to get to their essence, and it kind of worked. And then so I did a lot of paleo stuff, and then it was time for a new myth book, a new folkloric book. And this time I wanted to do something. I had done 2 like Nordic books, and I didn't want to get stuck in that sort of be the Norse guy. So I chose to do vampires in the undead. So then I took on, I illustrated and wrote about vampires from all over the world, or revenants and ghouls and other things that go bump in the night, so to speak, from all over the world. So it was a very global perspective instead of just focusing on Scandinavia, which of course had its own. It was hard because you had to do, when you're doing a book about Scandinavian folklore, you're digging where you stand, so to speak, and you got a sense of ownership. These are my stories. I'm allowed to do whatever the hell I want with them. You sort of own them. But when I'm doing something from Ghana or Indonesia or Malaysia or Native American story. I want to treat it right. I want to do it justice, and I don't want to do it in a colonial way. I don't. You have to think it through quite a lot to make it your own, because it's still my take on it, but do it in a respectful way. So that was probably the hardest part with that book, trying to sort of juggle those things without being too politically correct either, but just doing it right, and in that way, Facebook and the internet is quite a good help, because then I could just put up an illustration of say a Native American creature, and then I could just ask people if any of you fans are Native American, what do you think of this? And people responded and often liked it, but it became a sort of a way to a way to get feedback and get a sense that you were going in the right direction, that you weren't off, because otherwise people will tell you on Facebook. Even if you're right, people will tell you you're wrong on Facebook. But it's a sort of quick and dirty peer review process. At least you get notified if you do something completely wrong, and then you can rectify that. So I think that works, and trying to keep a dialogue with the fans, and many of my fans, or people who like my stuff, are very into folklore and are very knowledgeable, and lots of them are academics. So I got a lot of help in that respect, and that same thing with the paleontology. I've become friends with lots of paleontologists because they like my drawings, and that makes the drawings better, because I can ask them how they give me tips on how to make the dinosaurs more accurate. So it's really an interesting dynamic, and I would never have been able to do that in that way if without the internet, basically, without social media. It's a really interesting tool if you want to do these things. So I did the Undead, and then I did some more dinosaur books. I did a book about tyrannosaurs, the whole group, called T-Rex and Other Tyrannosaurs. I'm still sticking with the simple self-explanatory names. And a follow-up about sort of the classic nemesis of T-Rex, which is Triceratops. So I did a book about ceratopsians, the larger group of which Triceratops is one of the last members. Because both T-Rex and Triceratops lived at the very end of the reign of dinosaurs, of the Mesozoic, so they died out when the asteroid hit. So I did those, and then it became time to do a new myth book, which is my latest book, which is coming out in English in April, called Dragons. And again, a rather self-explanatory title. So Dragons is about dragon myths and dragon folklore from all over the world. So it's similar to the Undead in that respect, but more similar to the dinosaur books. It's about giant, scary reptiles with large teeth. But it was my chance. I love drawing animals, and I think that shows in the dinosaur book, because I sort of play around with the shapes and the anatomy and the way you can have a dragon flying and the tail is slithering all over the page, and they're snaking and sinuous, and they sort of squirm and slither around the pages. So I had so much fun drawing them, and the mythology is often really interesting, and it often becomes it's not dragons from all over the world. It's mainly focusing on dragons from the West, the Western dragons, the evil dragons, and Asian dragons, who are more benevolent and more godlike. So those are the two major dragon traditions in the world. Basically because the book would have been enormous if I brought up every culture's draconic, dragon-like creatures. It would have been 400 pages or so, 500, maybe 1,000 pages. But yeah, no, Dragons was a lot of fun to do. It's quite different from the undead, because the undead is about how it's about how people have treated death. It's about our own fear of death and how cultures all over the world have sort of manifested death as creatures. While Dragons is more about how people have manifested or personified the awesomeness of nature into dragons. So it's a different fear. I could make a series about different creatures that sort of personify different fears we humans have. But I think Dragons is about awesomeness in the original world, not just wow, this juice is awesome. It's but instilling awe. And dragons represent nature, power, storms, volcanoes, the predator, the idea of the predator. There's sort of a mix between all the animals that we humans fear and respect, like eagles and lions and snakes and for some reason bats. That don't really prey upon humans, but they got scary wings, so we respect them as well. But yeah, so that's my latest book. So my process is sort of a mix between physical and digital. I almost always start by sketching on paper with a pencil. So I do a pencil sketch, and then I do a tighter line art sketch but it was just pencils, regular lead pencils on paper, like copy paper, but it's a copy paper of slightly better quality, so it's like 100-gram paper or 120-gram paper, so it's not like floppy thin copying paper, but and then so that's the initial sketch, and I really need that. I need to do it by hand. I need to do a physical sketch because you need that sort of tactile. I want to feel the lead pencil against paper, and you need that to sort of make it come alive. And then I scan it into the computer, and then I color it in Photoshop. So all my color stuff is done in the computer, even though it might look like it's done by hand in aquarels or acrylics or whatever. But I work a lot with the textures that I've done in watercolor. So that I got a library of them, and I just sort of sponged and slathered on paint on paper. So I got a whole library of that, and then I sort of mix them and put them on top of each other and color them and do lots of trickery, digital trickery to them, to make them, and then that's how I use that to make the digital paintings look as non-digital as possible, because I want it to look like it's done by hand. That's sort of that's how I work. But describing exactly how I do it is kind of hard. But that's the general process. So it's always always a physical illustration, colored digital. Yes. So yeah, that's a bit about my process and yeah, the books I've done. So thanks for having me. And yeah, what did I wanted to say? Yeah. My new book Dragons will be out in English the 8th of April. I think you can get it from my web shop. We can perhaps add a link to and other places you can order it here in Europe. You can order it from Sweden, I think. Yeah. And what the future will bring, I'm not quite sure. I think next year is the anniversary for the 10-year anniversary for Väsen. So there might be sort of a new edition with some added. I want to add some, because the original book it's called Nordiska Väsen, like Nordic Väsen, but it's really focused on Sweden, and I want to expand that a bit. So it's about Sami Väsen, creatures from Finland, creatures from Iceland, creatures from Denmark, Norway. So it's more all-encompassing, that it truly is about the creatures of the north. So that's coming out, and yeah, then I got some other stuff planned, but I don't want to talk about that. And this year I'll try to take it a bit slow, because I've been working so much these last 10 years. But I also got with me and the Free League did a role-playing game based on Väsen, which is fun because it's sort of everything goes around in circles. So I was inspired by role-playing games, and now we've done a role-playing game about Väsen, based on Väsen, which was based on monster manuals, and now it's a monster manual for a role-playing game. So, but we've done a new source book, which is set in the British Isles. So it's the mythic Britain and Ireland. So that will come out soon. I think the Kickstarter ended in Christmas time, but you can make a late pledge. You can still be part of the Kickstarter campaign if you want to. So that'll be out in May-ish, I think. I think it should be out this spring. So it's fun, and it also sort of going around in circles, because now I got the chance to illustrate those very same Fae that Alan Lee and Brian Froud illustrated in Fairies. So I got the chance to do my take on those. So that was a lot of fun, because yeah, British fairy lore, British folklore is very close to my heart. It's sort of almost as close to my heart as Swedish folklore. So it was fun getting to have a swing at that. And it's written by Graham Davies, who is a renowned role-playing game author. He worked a lot for Games Workshop. He did some of the most classic Warhammer campaigns for Warhammer Fantasy role-playing back in the day. So we're really happy to have Graham writing for us. Yeah, and then I'll continue to do stuff. I want to do more stuff about paleontology. I want to do more stuff about myths. I want to do the Greek myths. I want to do Slavic myths. There's so much stuff I want to do. So I'll keep on swinging until I drop. But yeah, thanks for having me, and I hope you liked the video.
Yeah, that was that. Thank you very, very much, Johan Egerkrans, for coming to the English bookshop on Södermannagatan in Stockholm 2 times. The first time we lost track of time and you had to leave, but you graciously agreed to come back, and I'm so grateful. Anyway, for those of you who listen, get Väsen, get Norse gods, get dead or get the undead, and of course, since this one, Dragons, is out from April 8th in English, there's no reason not to get it. So follow the links, get the books. Again, thanks a lot, Johan Egerkrans, and also thank you very, very much, the English Bookshop, Uppsala, Stockholm. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much.